General Sharma, General Katoch, all those who are attending the talk today. It's an important subject, like General Sharma actually covered this in some short form. And seems to be the order of the day as it goes today. Most of the countries do not want to get into a conflict, but they would like to do everything which is below the threshold. And that's what gray zone warfare is all about. And China has been past masters at it, starting from earlier times till now, and I'm sure in future also they will continue to do this. And it is important for us to have a look at this and then see as to how we can do. I'm sure already done a few things which I'll cover in the talk, but I'm sure we need to keep this in mind and continue to deal with this the way we deem fit. To start with, I'll just in 2 slides, I'm going to just show one definition and one characteristics of gray zone warfare, so that we keep that in the context of our discussion subsequently. Just 1 second. Let the slide. Yeah. See, the deliberate. One of the definitions? There are many definitions of gray zone warfare which you will see in the net, but one of them which I think fits actually into the exact definition of gray zone warfare is deliberate multidimensional activities by a state actor just below the threshold which General Sharma alluded to of aggressive use of military forces. Basically, you don't want to use aggressively the military forces, but everything you want to do below that threshold. It is a deliberate action, and it is multidimensional, and it is by a state actor. These are the 3 important points that we need to keep in mind when we deal with this particular warfare. This, of course, many of you would have seen the definition earlier, but seen the saying by Sun Tzu earlier, though the actual translation doesn't actually say this. It says it is not only good to win wars like this, but it is also good to win wars without fighting, is what it says actually. But then this is what generally is an accepted kind of a saying, and so I put it here. And gray zone warfare typically follows this particular thing. You basically try to subdue the enemy without fighting, and that is where the gray zone warfare fits into. This is a calculus, basically the cost and benefit. As the non-kinetic key is going up, you find the geopolitical and economic vulnerability key is going up. On the kinetic, of course, these two are actually becoming constricted.
Okay.
Also, give you 8 of these characteristics of gray zone warfare. First is, sorry for the spelling mistake, remains below the threshold of military response. It unfolds gradually. It is not one step. It unfolds gradually over a number of steps, number of actions in multidimensional mode. Lack of attributability. Basically, it avoids getting attributed to a particular country which takes this action. Use of legal and political justifications, which China is very good at in the form of three warfare strategy of theirs. Stops short of threatening the opponent's vital interest, because the moment you threaten the opponent's vital interest, he is bound to react. You want to keep it below the threshold of threatening him. The risk of escalation for coercion. Build non-military tools, wherein you find other things which I'll explain as we go along, and target specific vulnerability. This is something that you keep in mind. Target specific vulnerability of the opponent. Here, I'm just explaining 8 characteristics. I've just put a few pictures to give you an annotation of how these things transform in Chinese actions. And thereafter, I'll cover a few more issues which will actually refer to what is actually happening not only in the Indian domain, but is also in the other domains. Below the threshold, you find cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, influence operations, etc. Tactics in the Indian Ocean, we have seen it in many numbers. I'll explain to you subsequently. So this is that we need to keep in mind. Below the threshold is one thing. Second is unfold over a period of time. You find the Confucius Institutes, the the kind of influence operations, the kind of intrusion operation that they do in many of the countries, and also the talent program that they follow. All these things are actually doing one step at a time, but not a single step towards achieving what they want to achieve and put pressure on the countries. You can see the debt trap, which many countries have got into. You can see the global data initiative, global data security initiative, which they brought in as a counter to the clean network initiative of the US, which is putting pressure on the countries to join them. This is something that we need to keep in mind. It is a competition. One country does it, the other country, like China, also reacts to it and then puts pressure on the countries. Lack of attributability. Maritime militia is a very good example of this. You find men, what they call as blue men in the South China Sea. They do all kinds of activities, but lack the attributability. Similarly, lot of fishing vessels operating in the Indian Ocean region and elsewhere also, who are actually doing other things also than fishing. But again, it subscribes to lack of attributability. Some more, you find the influence operation, basically some kind of psychological operations was tried, but it was clearly a fake news on the microwave attack in Ladakh. Also on satellite technology. Last night you would have heard, if any of you have watched on Gravitas, you would have heard about almost 200,000 people infiltrating into many of these institutions, Communist Party members getting into many of the institutions in various parts of the country, including Boeing, including Jaguar Land Rover, in many of the top commercial establishments, you find this kind of a thing happening. Also, use of lasers in Djibouti against the American pilots. That was again also considered to be a coercive kind of tactics. But again, lack of attributability because it can't be actually pinpointed as to who did that. Use of legal and political justifications. I'll cover this a little more in the next part. But please understand this. You find this 9-dash line, which has actually been propagated in terms of something as a legal kind of a justification. Also, it talks about Nepal, the boundary, etc., reappropriating Buddhism based on historical facts. So basically, what the Chinese are building up a picture is on three warfare tactics of theirs, and that three warfare tactics is simple: legal, information, and media. So this is something that we need to keep in mind, that they will be at it all the time. Stop short of threatening vital assets. Basically, they do this in South China Sea. They keep claiming those reefs and islands, etc. That is one thing. In other ways, they keep putting pressure on various countries. For example, Taiwan was mentioned earlier by General Sharma. Not only Taiwan, where the PLA aircraft has been actually violating their territory. Not only that, they are putting pressure on Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. But they always stay short of threatening the vital assets. They put pressure. The tactics I'll explain to you subsequently. Air Defense Identification Zone is one such activity. But other than that, you find they put pressure on these countries to keep them under pressure, but stop short of threatening their vital assets. Threat of escalation as a coercive thing. Economic thing is one. Our own LAC is an example. And in other areas like South Pacific, there have been actually putting pressure on coercive leverage, basically pitching themselves against either Australia or US or any other country that is trying to come into that place. Similarly, Doklam, we don't have to say anything much about it. Everybody knows this. The reefs, you can see it on top. And you find wolf warrior tactics of China, which has been very prevalent in the summer of this year, but it has gone down quite a bit in the last couple of months, last 3 months, basically because of the backlash that they faced. So if you look at the original graph which I showed you, as these kind of activities increase, you find the political backlash also is increasing. So therefore, they need to pull back. It does not mean they will not do it again. They can, but at the moment, it seems to be on a low key. RCEP is one more thing which they put pressure. They tried to put pressure on India through this, but India withstood this particular pressure, and therefore it did not attain the kind of goals that China was looking at on this. But this is one of the examples that we can have as far as economic issues are concerned. Non-military tools, water as a weapon, you can say it. They haven't signed any of the water sharing treaties with the lower riparian states or the middle riparian states like us. So this is something that they have ensured that they keep the leverage with them. Then I talked about the infiltration of the Chinese Communist Party in various organizations, which is also mentioned on that picture that you see there. They also put pressure on one China policy. You find many of the airlines could not operate to mainland China, basically because they showed Taiwan as different as a Republic of China separately. They have been putting pressure on many of the airlines, which many of the airlines have actually fallen in line with that particular requirement so that they can continue to operate to Taiwan. Other way of doing, one more example of non-military tools is creating an alternative financial system. You find the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, New Development Bank, etc. Also putting pressure on the Asian Development Bank not to sanction certain loans or certain grants to loans to projects which are in the disputed areas, etc. Like, for example, we are quite clear that Arunachal Pradesh is not disputed. But when Arunachal Pradesh was looking for assistance from Asian Development Bank, the Chinese put a spoke into it. So these are ways and means of putting pressure on other countries. Target specific vulnerabilities. I have given certain examples here. One of the greatest examples of this is the One Belt One Road initiative. When they launched this One Belt One Road initiative, initially out of the 60 countries which tried to join this initiative, almost 41 countries, which we did a study in the center, almost 41 countries had either come out of a civilian strife or had very weak economic situation. They went in for such countries basically to get into those countries. So targeting the specific vulnerability in two aspects: weak political systems and weak financial systems. Now I'm going to explain to you certain other activities by the People's Republic of China. Use of paramilitary capability. I talked about the Blue Men and the militia, maritime militia, which have got some kind of training, but no affiliation is shown towards either the Coast Guard or the PLA Navy, but they continue to operate in the gray zone. So this is something which they are using it to very great effect. Chinese Coast Guard itself is another one. Fishing vessels I talked to you about. There are about 600 odd fishing vessels in the Indian Ocean region on a constant basis. They also do other activities like surveillance, etc., which has been reported in many of the media and by many of the analysts. South China Sea is another example which I quoted to you about. In that, they follow these tactics. By and large, on the opposing either fishing trawlers or ships, they try to ram it, they try to shoulder that particular ship or use water cannons, but they have not tried to open fire. So basically, they're trying to keep it under the threshold, but keep putting pressure on the other ships, the fishing vessels of the other countries which are in the disputed areas. Political subversion campaign, I have given few countries. Australia is one. You know, the Australia-China relations have taken a nosedive because of this particular thing, not only political subversion, but also the influence operation that are perceived to have been held in the Australian universities and also in the Australian economic issues. So this is something that is actually, the political subversion is something that we can see. Sam Dastri is a case. Other cases are there in Australia. Nepal is a case. Sri Lanka, Maldives, during the previous presidency, you find that these kind of subversion campaign is also being resorted to. Use of UN against India, basically you would recall that after the redrawing of the Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories, you found that the Chinese took the UN route to put pressure on India. They tried it, it did not work so well. That's a different issue. But the fact of the matter remains that they use also this route to put pressure. On the psychological war and disinformation campaigns, you please look at the way the Confucius Institutes are sprawled all over the world. Though they are facing a pushback in many of the places, you find that they come up in various other forms. Need not necessarily be in terms of Confucius Institutes. They can come in terms of Chinese language institutes, Chinese traditional medicine institutes, and they take various forms. So this is something that is a soft power kind of thing that they project, and to project their culture in the form of projecting their culture, etc. It also has other implications. Create and manage narrative. This is something that the Chinese are good at. One clear example of this is the COVID-19 situation. The entire world knows that it originated from China, but still they try to palm off the responsibility to other countries, including India, and they do it also out of Indian soil, because I think the Chinese consulate also put out a tweet saying that it originated from India. So these are kind of narratives that they create and then they try to manage. On the LAC, also they have been trying to create a narrative that the Indians are the ones who are actually violated the line of actual control and the agreements that have been agreed upon so far. This is a narrative that they have been trying to do. But on this, I don't think, I feel that the success for the Chinese is mixed. Only a few countries, maybe like Pakistan and others, will probably take that argument. But others are actually, again, not willing to bite that bullet on this particular issue. So the thing that I am trying to do is create and manage narrative on the LAC. If you link it up, you find the way they manage the narrative on the UNCLOS ruling that came up in 2016 by the PCA, that is the Permanent Court of Arbitration judgment in July 2016. See how they manage that narrative. So far in the South China Sea, we don't see much of pushback from any of the countries. Slowly and steadily, the Chinese have increased their influence. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. Slowly but steadily, they'll keep pushing, and we need to be prepared for it. As far as manipulation of borders is concerned, you find the passports with watermarks were given. If you remember, if you recall, in the past, the passports with watermarks were issued, or the visas with watermarks were issued. Claims to territory has actually been shifting. You find all of a sudden the claim in 1959 being passed around, which there was no line actually on that particular letter which came up. The denial of visas to people from Arunachal Pradesh and to people from J&K in some form, particularly the government officials, is something that they have been trying to use. Also, populating the ghost villages and creating new villages. There are three things in this. One is that as part of a development strategy in Tibet, 628 villages were to be modernized. That is part of the Xiaokong initiative, which they took 15 years ago, which is supposed to be completing this year or probably next year, which will say that all these villages have come up to a moderately well-off kind of a society. Second thing is, there are a lot of these ghost villages along the border, which they will try and populate. That is one of the issues. The other issues is creating the new villages. Like you find in terms of, recently there were reports that along the line of actual control in Bhutan, in the Bhutanese territory, you find a village coming up 2 kilometers away from the border. So you find that this is a tactic that is being orchestrated for two things. One, to ensure that these border areas get populated, developed, connected, which will help in development, plus also help the PLA. That is one. Second, by populating these villages, you also put pressure on the when you try to resolve the boundary, then these populated villages will actually score as a negotiating point. So these are things that we need to keep in mind as far as manipulation of the borders are concerned. Information operations, most of these particular issues like border, Buddhism, etc., they take the route of textbook and the media in China to propagate the claims. So this is something that is being done as an information operations. Cyber operations I mentioned to you about. You find lot of effort on cyber operations by Chinese. That is a different subject by itself. One can speak on that for a full lecture on this subsequently. United Front Work Department funded political campaigns. All these operations outside the country and within the country regarding propaganda, psychological operations are done by the United Front Work Department. It is a well orchestrated, well structured department which carries out this. Also target academic institutions. You find many of these Confucius institutes which I talked about earlier, were all into the universities in US, Australia, Europe, etc. They are facing a pushback now from New Zealand, Australia, US, and some other countries. But the fact of the matter is that the academic institutions are the concentration for these kind of efforts. Legal arguments in position paper. This is something that we need to again take note of. You find a lot of position papers being put out. Even during Doklam, they put out a 14 pages white paper talking on the position of the Doklam. But the issue is it did not contain much of material, but it tried to portray as if they are in the right and they actually legally argue their status on the position paper. On the economic measures, debt trap is one of the issues that everybody knows. A lot of people have spoken about it in many of the lectures. Non-tariff barriers is something that they resort to while creating issues for the countries to deal with them. Like, for example, one of the reasons why we have a large trade deficit with China is basically because of the non-tariff barriers that they have imposed on many of the issues. Like, for example, food industry, if your food, canned or bottled food, which has to go out to Europe, if it can meet the European and US standards, we see no reason as to why it can't meet the Chinese standards. So they create some kind of phytosanitary conditions, etc., etc. Non-tariff barriers are imposed basically to ensure that economically you don't get into that country. Use of state-owned enterprises like China National Overseas Oil Corporation, China Communication Construction Company, etc. for purposes of putting pressure. Like, for example, China Communication Construction Company is the one which did all the dredging for reclaiming the 7 reefs in the South China Sea. The oil corporation is the one which goes abroad to acquire assets, put pressure on economy of various countries. Travel bans, like for example, South Korea, the moment it deployed THAAD from US, there were travel bans imposed from the Chinese side on South Korea. Denial of rare earths, when a fishing trawler captain of Chinese was arrested by the Japanese, Chinese denied rare earth export to Japan. So this put pressure on the Japanese to release that person. Banning of imports, like for example, the moment the PCA verdict of the Philippines was put under pressure to go to the Permanent Court of Arbitration, they stopped import of fruits from Philippines, which actually affected the economy of that country very badly. So they have to revert back to maintaining good relations with China. Similarly, when Liu Xiaobo, who is a civil rights activist, who was given Nobel Prize by Norway, they stopped the import of salmon from Norway. When His Holiness Dalai Lama visited Mongolia, they imposed duty on commodities from Mongolia to put pressure on the country. These are issues, economic measures by which they will be able to put pressure on many of the countries. Tourism is another thing that they actually use as a tool for putting pressure. Like, for example, Maldives. Maldives depends mostly on tourism. Recently, you would have heard reports saying that Maldives is looking for tourism from China. basically Chinese were in large numbers coming to visit Maldives. So the moment the government puts pressure on tourism, it also affects the economy of other countries, and the other countries are bound to toe the line or come back to negotiating to China. It is not that we have not been doing anything on these kind of issues. This year alone, if you look at, we have taken a number of economic measures. First one was the ban on apps. Ban on apps, many people do question whether it had effect or otherwise. If you look at it individually, no, I would say they have some effect, but not so much. But there has been a cumulative effort. When India banned these apps, there are other countries also which started looking at banning of apps by them. So that actually added pressure onto the Chinese. Second thing, restriction in construction and transport related contracts. This has been imposed. So this has affected my rough estimate, back of the envelope calculation is approximately 62,000 crores worth of contracts have been cancelled so far. Delayed inspection and clearance of Chinese goods. When the Chinese goods come to ports, there has been some amount of delay, which has again been reported in the media. So this is something that again puts pressure on the Chinese. Amendment in FDI, targeting Chinese investments. I won't say it is only targeting Chinese investments. It is for all the countries having border with India. But the amendment in the FDI has put some pressure on the Chinese, because they couldn't actually have the easy run of investing into many of the companies that they would like to invest in India. Restricting participation in tenders for government procurement. Government procurement, now we have said that mostly we will do it from Indian country, domestic companies. So this has again denied an opportunity for the Chinese companies to come in. Raising the basic customs duty. This was there in the news yesterday. Raising the basic customs duty of 40% on modules and 25% on solar cells. Because if you see, when the International Solar Alliance was launched and the duty structure was formed, you find the Chinese had the best run on it. And most of the solar equipment in India and of course the power equipment in India, you find there is a influence of the Chinese companies on this particular issue. So this imposition of duties, of course, this is going to come into effect from 2022. This is something that is going to put some more pressure on the Chinese. So on the economic side, we have taken some measures which can put pressure on China. You also look at other issues. For example, if you take your mind back to Sundaramchu, the moment they came in, what did we do? We inducted a brigade which actually deployed in a manner that it restricted the move of the Chinese, which ultimately forced them to vacate that place. In Depsa, again, we did the same thing. We deployed ahead, we deployed opposite them, and then put pressure on them to negotiate. Chuma, Doklam, Eastern Ladakh this time. This year around, you find a lot of things surprise the Chinese, which was below the threshold, but it ensured that the Chinese were kept under pressure. One, the quick induction of troops into Eastern Ladakh the moment we found the Chinese troops were moving in. That is one. Two, they didn't expect the Galwan incident, though, of course, you can't strictly term it as lack of aggressive behavior. There was aggressive behavior there. But Galwan is the second incident. Third, the movement toward the south bank of on the Rechinla, Razangla, that particular ridge, the Kailash range mainly. That is the third one. Fourth one, the economic measures which I explained to you. Like this, a number of incidents have taken place by India, which has also kept China under pressure. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. Also in the Indian Ocean region, you find that surveillance of the PLA ships, we do it very clearly, and you find even in media, it has come out that we send a message to the Chinese ships when they come in to say welcome to Indian Ocean region. Also, we monitor the maritime activity of the Chinese in the Indian Ocean region. These are the things that actually we do, and therefore, in some form, we are also doing this kind of gray zone activity in our neighborhood and on our borders. I will stop here. I have spoken for more than 35 minutes. I'll stop here and I'll take on the questions if there are any.